Hey, hello everybody. Today I'm here to talk with you about the model of hierarchical complexity in more detail than I ever have before. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this will be as good an introduction as any. So I'm going to share my screen and get some stages on screen so we can start to talk about what there is to talk about. Cool. Um, People should be able to see it now. So what we're looking at is, as you can see in the upper left, this is a part of the Listening Society, a meta-modern guide to politics, book one by Hansi Freinacht, which I heartily recommend to anyone interested in stage theory or how it might be applicable to politics, especially. Um, the model of hierarchical complexity is a stage theory that seeks specifically, well, it's devised by Michael Commons, I should mention, of Harvard base. And he got together a pretty comprehensive stage theory of complexity of tasks. So this is specifically more of a cognitive measure. There isn't anything inherently personal or spiritual or egoic on here. Um, but it's pretty cool because it would at least claim to be able to put any task, anything, any creature is trying to do according to some criteria, it would put it on a scale of hierarchical complexity. And this was the very first stage theory I ever encountered, even before spiral dynamics or anything like that. And it was pretty cool to see something that explicitly included all life forms, because that's a perk of this. It isn't just about human activities, as you might already see on the screen here. It's about activities in general. And so I'm going to go through each of these one by one. On the earlier ones, so like everything on screen, especially, I'm going to just kind of breeze through what's written here. And then when we get to the stages that more humans are at most of the time, we can start talking a bit more. And then after that, we can talk implications, perhaps among ourselves, because there's some cool stuff here. So the zero, the very initial stage of complexity of tasks, where tasks are quantal, that is, they can only be completed or uncompleted. There's no like halfway doing a task. Um, the first one is just distinguishing between zero and one, between something and nothing. This can go down to the computational level. It's only reacting to stimuli without any kind of distinguishing for strength of reaction. There's no more qualia to it than that. Something's there or not. Humans pass the stage long before we're born, indeed, before we were even conceived. Stage up from that is the automatic stage,
Do you,
which
do you,
self.
um, do you get what he means by like DNA itself?
What was that?
Do you get what he means by like DNA itself?
I would assume it's that it only reacts. There's no consideration or anything. I don't know the specific microbiological details to this shout out now.
Interesting. I would have thought that that goes down to the atoms level, like that an electron either feels a positive charge or negative charge that draws it or repels it. But DNA seems a lot more complicated.
It may be just at the level of what it is replying to. That DNA could be more complicated, but it isn't. It isn't at the
Hmm.
automatic stage, for instance.
Okay.
So what you're describing at the molecular level could very well still be true. Um, But at the automatic stage, cells, for example, can react to stimuli depending on different quantities, but only by automatic response and never through learning. So there's no coordination of different stimuli, there's just single stimulus response. Um, Single cell organisms are what we're looking at here. So my favorite thing about this scale is that it can give you some idea of what anything is doing at all. Every living thing is on this continuum. Um, it's just one of my favorite things about this scale. Um, Past the automatic stage, at the sensory or motor stage, we have things like amoebas. You can react in different ways to different stimuli, and you can coordinate two stimuli responses, but not invent a new response. And you can move body parts because you're coordinating responses in that way. So leeches, for example, if you shine a lamp on it and shock it with electricity several times, you can get it to respond to just the lamp as if there was an electric shock. It's responding to stimuli, not in a very inventive way, but it is. And you get amoeba, slugs, mollusks, and early human fetuses here. Past that, you have the circular sensory motor stage, which insects, fish, and newborn humans can work at, who can reach, touch, grab, shake objects, babble, make single sounds, can move body parts after having perceived objects, and can recognize things. So you're already seeing more coordination than the stage before. And indeed, like this is a stage that coordinates this small unit of tasks at the sensory or motor stage. Most predatory fish, insects, and newborn humans work at this stage. And to be clear, in the context of the model of hierarchical complexity, a person or entity could be said to be at a stage when that stage of complexity is the most complex task they're able to complete on their own, which is a big caveat that'll become clearer when it comes to things more familiar to humans. But there are a lot of tasks that we can there are a lot of concepts, for example, that humans can work with because somebody else came up with them first. And so it may be a very highly complex endeavor to come up with certain theories or certain ways of dealing with systems. But once these are taught to people, people at lower levels of complexity can recreate them. So past the circular sensory motor stage, we have the sensory motor stage, where rats and small babies and other creatures are, who can do series of movements that are calibrated after one another and build upon one another to achieve something. You can think of a rat building a nest. This includes putting several sounds together so that you can form a morpheme, at least in the language-prone species of humans. You can use combinations of sounds to express something, but not yet use a full word consistently. You're kind of starting to reach with meaning, for example, like thinking of small babies at this stage, but you aren't yet at the next stage, the nominal stage, where we can find even pigeons and 1-year-old toddlers. At the nominal stage, we can find relations among concept, and you make them into words, like single words, exclamations, or knowing what a word means. It's nominal because you can name stuff. And this is when you can begin to understand what other organisms mean. So it's understanding a kind of basic referent for the first time. Past the nominal stage, at the sentential stage, that is sentence-like stage, you can put words together into sentences and see a series of simple tasks that need to be coordinated and imitate a sequence. So where we had our first reference before, we can put them in order now. This allows for the use of pronouns like I, mine, you, yours, it, etc. These being more abstract than names of things and being able to be phrased like in relation. Parrots can reach the sentential stage. Cats can. Toddlers around 2 and 3 can. After the sentential stage, we're at the pre-operational stage, which got cut off a bit here, where 3 to 5-year-old humans can be found. And here you can make simple deductions, but not spot contradictions. You can follow lists of sequential acts and tell short stories by coordinating several sentences. So we're coordinating several sentences now. Each level of task builds on and coordinates the last level of task. And when we talk about coordination in the model of hierarchical complexity, we mean in a very broad sense that tasks are arranged in a non-arbitrary way or according to some requirement. And this is extremely broad. It can be for something to make sense logically. It can be to achieve something in your environment. but that is the size of the constraint. It's just, can you arrange these things? I don't know if I want to say for a purpose, but in accordance with some requirements, as opposed to just putting them like in any old order. Like in the sentential stage, instead of just saying word, 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 you are actually putting a sentence of words together. So at the pre-operational stage, we can arrange sentences in a non-arbitrary way. We can tell short stories, for instance. And we can use connectives in humans like if, then, as, when, etc. And you can put together several sentences into paragraphs. Dogs and small children 3 to 5 can do this. Now at 8, we're at the primary stage. We're starting to get closer to like day-to-day human thought. Here, we can do logical deduction and use empirical rules. Use, not create. And use empirical rules. We can add, subtract, divide, multiply, prove, do a series of tasks on its own. Can relate to times, places, can count acts, and relate to separate actors. Can construct relatively coherent narratives, groups of paragraphs, and these create accounts and ideas of what's going on. So chimpanzees and rhesus monkeys, as well as humans 5 to 7, can be here. This is another kind of relating to a referent, if you want to say, when you can relate to times and places. This is when things start to appear more solidly in a creature's experience. But this is really set in stone, so to speak, at the concrete stage, 7 to 11, ages 7 to 11 in humans, where you can do long division, follow complex social rules, take on roles, and coordinate self with others. You can create meaningful, concrete stories. So still speaking directly to things, we aren't at abstractions yet, and keep the same story intact and consequential over time. Put together groups of paragraphs into a story. Can thus keep track of interrelations, which is the best tool, and how you which is the best tool and how you would test it. You can keep track of social events, what happened among others, reasonable deals, history, geography. So this is where storytelling comes online in a concrete sense. This is normal in humans at ages 7 to 11, but also a significant portion of the adult population. In the famous bonobo chimpanzee experiments of Franz de Waal, there are examples of concrete stage behaviors, such as testing several tools to determine which is the best one. Notice this like early experimental way of dealing with really real things. It isn't just that there are things out there, like at the primary stage, where we can follow rules. We can start to work with the various things that are out there and try to, and by keeping track of their interrelations, we can start to optimize in a way. Past the concrete stage, we're at stage 10, abstract, where we can talk about humans aged 11 to 14. Like this is when that often shows up for humans. This is when we can form abstract ideas and thoughts, that is, single, generalized variables that fall beyond the concrete sequences of events in a story. We can make and quantify abstract propositions. So at this stage, we relate to categories and use cases of events to incrementally improve the understanding of these categories. So you can like look across a bunch of events and abstract something that isn't concretely in any of them, but we can still talk about those variables. And to kind of put you on the map with other stage theories you may know of, at this stage, we're getting into what we talk about more often as kind of in the amber area. With the formal stage, you'll definitely recognize that that corresponds to orange or to modernity or however you want to phrase it. But with the abstract stage, I think it's interesting to mention that this is the first stage that we are purely working with humans in. No known human animals can create abstractions across different kinds of categories, for instance, like to create their own abstract categories. It hasn't been observed. I will leave it to people more experienced in the realm of animal linguistics to know how we would even detect that in creatures that are not like us. But we're on our own here at this point. All of the animal kingdom was in the earlier stages. But with abstractions, when we start to coordinate those in non-arbitrary ways, we can reach our formal stage, reached by people aged 14 to 18, if at all. And this is where we can identify relations between abstract variables and reflect upon these relations, devise ways to test them, etc. And we can solve problems using algebra with one unknown, and we can use logic and empiricism. So in a way, it kind of mirrors our concrete stage in that we are managing interrelations with a thing that is real to us in a way, only instead of the very simple objects of the primary stage, it's abstractions. And so we can manage relations between abstractions and reflect on and update our understanding of them. At this stage, we can speak a full, rich language with self-reflection. We can use logical sequence of connectives like if this, then that, or in all cases. We can start to qualify our abstractions in this way. And this is reached by people 14 years old and onward. It's the most common stage in adult human beings, so like 40% of the adult population in so-called developed countries. And only a minority go beyond this stage.
Regarding the
Past,
second point,
go.
um, regarding the second point there, the if this then that, didn't you say that at the top also in the at the end of the seventh stage? It's on the top of the screen.
Yeah, so this is pre-logical. You can put sentences into a paragraph. You can make simple deductions here, but it isn't the same as like formal, like, how do I describe this? We aren't even working with abstractions at that point. So when we say if this, then that, we're talking as someone that can appreciate abstract variables at this point. So you can think of like coding, for instance, like if X, then Y is something we can think about at a formal stage when we know what those abstract variables are. Whereas here in the pre-operational stage, we'd be thinking of like very literal, like complete story things. You can think of a child asking about if something, but they aren't going to understand a relation between abstract variables like if X then Y. Does that start to get at it for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Okay. So formal stage. A lot of people here. A lot of people stay here. Most politics in general in the world, in the developed world, is conducted at this stage. Most policy is at this stage. Past that, we're at the post-formal stages, and these are the ones that Michael Commons made a big deal about. When we are up to the formal stage, we are still within the realm of Piaget, that luminary of stage theory, and he had theorized that this is about as far as adult humans go. But in this system, we have 4 post-formal stages that Michael Commons' advances are quite important for any kind of innovation or problem solving on a grand scale. Because the thing about working with relations between abstract variables and reflecting on those is that's great and all, but you aren't building entirely new theories at this point. When I say theories, I mean like bodies of knowledge that would work on greater and greater cases. You can just you're drawing lines between variables. But when you start identifying patterns among linear relationships between abstract variables, thus forming systems of relationships among abstract variables and how they interact, this is when you're at the systematic stage. Most people don't get here. Most people don't take like their thoughts on how abstract variables relate and relate those relations into a coherent belief system within themselves. It's not a task most people do. Um, let alone trying to apply to many topics outside of their purview. Um, being able to identify patterns among linear relationships and form systems of relations among variables, we can also solve equations with several unknowns. As I said, this is the first post-formal stage. And at this stage, you can begin to discuss legal systems, social structures, ecosystems, economic systems, and so on. This is about 20% of adult humans, usually after age 18. So this is the one that corresponds with green or postmodern, depending on your stage. And a quirk of this systematic stage is when people, especially like when this is a person's stage, when this is the highest they operate at, they are often prone to have fleshed out or systematized a view based on what their specialty is. So, for example, an engineer will have like a systematic engineering inclined outlook. They will tend to think that a lot of things work like engineering. And that's because they've related a lot of patterns among linear relationships within that context. Or a different person could do sociology, for instance. And this can lead to a person having blind spots, for example, things that would conflict with the system that they have in their head, the way they make sense of things. And at the same time, people can be fairly insistent that if folks saw how all things interrelated, you just you would have an easier go of life. Basically, that if the complexity that they appreciate were appreciated, even as it is, kind of a collapsed on. Sorry, I see a hand. Yes, Barbara.
So what you're talking about there sounds to me a lot like what uh, mathematical chemists do, mathematical physicists do. The sort of if then in multiple systems, multiple variables, right?
Hmm.
So, but I like the idea that it's only in their field.
For a lot of folks, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes some sense. So if I can do that in in a mathematics class, I'm there. It's easier to see than in a sociology field, right?
Yeah, definitely, because you're dealing with literal variables, and it's you can plainly prove like what you're doing. Yeah. Um,
Not all mathematics is literal.
no.
Sorry, imaginary numbers, for
Oh yeah.
example.
No. I'll
Yeah,
show
so
you. Yeah, if we have a chart, I'll
not
show you.
necessarily literal.
Yeah, if we what I mean is like symbolically depictable. If we have time at the end, I can show you another chart in one of Michael Collins's papers that gives mathematical examples for a task at each stage. And you can see how that plays out mathematically. Um, but yeah, that's the systematic stage. It's a big deal. It's the first post-formal stage. It deals with a whole higher level of relations than our formal stage on which much of our present society is built. Um, but it does still have its limits. For instance, it cannot compare and synthesize several systems with differing logics to put together meta-systems or conclusions that hold true across different systems and reflect upon and name general properties of systems. We're still mired in our systematic perspective here, but at the meta-systematic stage, you can start looking across different systems and talking about kind of broader similarities or likenesses or coordinations. You can understand that things can be homomorphic, isomorphic, etc. This means you can see how one system can be changed in corresponding or differing ways compared to another system. You can if you think about it, you can see how this is the stage of complexity at which stage theories proper really start to make sense because stages posit very different systems per person, like ways of making sense of and relating things. And when you start comparing them across like higher variables, different things about systems, this is when you can start actually relating stages to each other, and you can relate yourself to these different stages. But that's not a ton of people. And past this, past our meta-systematic stage, we have our paradigmatic stage, which people can reach in their mid-20s and above, if at all. Here we can deal with several very abstract meta-systems to create new ways of thinking of the world, new paradigms, new sciences or branches within sciences. Paradigmatic thinkers have a fractal way of thinking, so that the universal principles found are applicable to many different levels and analysis and levels of analysis and phenomena. So a higher level of finding these these like already very abstract variables between systems is what we're going with here at the paradigmatic stage. It's hard to gauge the prevalence of it. Not a lot of people, about 3 million in the world. If the stats from the earlier stages kind of hold. And I believe one of the examples given in Michael Common's papers is Maxwell's equations synthesizing the fields that they do, relating meta systems. But I can pop back more into that paper if you want to dive more into that example. Our last stage, currently defined, although I've heard term of a meta cross-paradigmatic stage, I have seen no writing on it. I'm not going to acknowledge it. We have the last stage that I know of called the cross-paradigmatic stage, which can deal with several paradigms, several, how do I put this? Several ways of deriving universal principles from meta systems to create new fields. Or in the usage of this term, they could also mean basically to completely revolutionize a field. So for some examples, Newton's reformulation of physics, Darwin's theory of evolution, Einstein's theory of relativity, the invention of quantum physics, the invention of chaos mathematics and complexity, the invention of computing, the invention of postmodern philosophy, the invention of the holistic integral theory of Ken Wilber, the invention of stage theory, the invention of the model of hierarchical complexity. There are really no guesses on prevalence. People that are over 20 and have good circumstances, it most often shows up around 30. There's no reliable test for this stage. So this paradigmatic would correspond to turquoise if you're still trying to directly map them. Cross paradigmatic is whatever you would think is after that.
When all those examples seem to fit with his definition that he gave in paradigmatic, like Newton's reformulation of physics would be a new branch within science or a new paradigm in science. Doesn't seem like you need to go to cross paradigmatic to get there.
It would depend how you're defining field. Like I noticed redundancy even in like paradigm and paradigm. Or I've seen them use like the word field in a redundant way to describe what goes on here. So how would I put this? It's basically from what I've seen, speaking as a person that has not invented a theory of evolution from scratch, is that it's about stepping even further outside of convention in a way to imagine genuinely novel ways of seeing things. So like I said, new ways of coordinating universal principles that could be found in meta systems. So whereas here you are like finding universal principles that can apply to many different levels of analysis and phenomena, here are entirely different ways of conceiving of those. Hence its rarity. But it's huge impact when someone really gets to get something down.
But it's also kind of weird because if you think of Darwin, he wasn't the only one that invented it at the same time. So there's this idea of the adjacent possible and what can be done right now based on, you know, current technologies and all of that, current data available. So I'm wondering if there's something about life conditions that's important there too.
There's something about life conditions and about access to information for sure. So Darwin coordinated across tons of different fields, biology, geology, to come up with evidence to like posit this entirely new way of things coming into being, or this pretty new way. Like of course there've been discussion of some kind of developmental way things have come along. There was Lamarck, and I know that Darwin was not the only one to come up with evolution as we know it. But yeah, it's about coordinating across vastly different fields and perspectives to come to something new. I guess we're in question and answer. Gail, what's up?
Yes, thank you. Can you say again what this model is about? It's the tasks, abilities, or?
Yeah, so it's tasks of varying hierarchical complexity. So I would actually like to put a different chart on screen to start to present what that can look like. This is from a paper called Hierarchical Complexity of Tasks Shows the Existence of Developmental Stages. And here you can see an example of a task at each level with respect to mathematics. So,
okay.
Here, for example, back at primary, there are behaviors that act on such classes that we call simple arithmetic operations. So you can follow these very simple operations of very concrete, simple things. And then at the concrete stage, there are behaviors that order the simple arithmetic behaviors when multiplying a sum by a number. Such distributive behaviors require the simple arithmetic behavior as a prerequisite, not just a precursor. So to know how to distribute this multiplication, yes, you do need the arithmetic mentioned before, but you need to know how distribution works. Then at the abstract stage, all forms of 5 in the 5 rows in the example are equivalent in value, x equals 5, forming class based on abstract feature. So in a mathematical example, this is not like necessarily the most intuitive way, at least for me, but you are forming single variable abstractions in that way. X equals 5 is something you can even process because X as an abstract variable is on your radar for the first time. But at the formal stage, you can start looking at ways of coordinating abstract variables. So we can understand that the general left-hand distributive relation, like the very general way of doing this with general abstract variables, instead of following along to something like this at the concrete stage, goes as follows. At systematic, we're coordinating little rules, basically. And at that stage, we can tell, for example, that the right-hand distribution law is not true for numbers for this kind of thing. This is not true, as that laid out here, but it is true for proportions and sets. In this circumstance, in this context, if you will, this rule holds. And at meta-systematic, which is the last one illustrated here, that's drawing variables between systems, which for example, recognizing that propositional logic and elementary set theory are isomorphic. Like they are not the same, but they can have similar like overall forms. They can relate to each other in an abstract way.
Yeah, but I mean the tasks are cognitive tasks, right? It looks very cognitive, like it
yes,
looks
they
like
are. This is like a strictly cognitive measure.
Yeah. And is it possible you to give quick concrete examples of how it goes for the levels from formal and systematic, meta-systematic, and like from formal to above, because I have a hard time understanding the abstract way it is written, and also the mathematical language is not what I understand the best. So
totally understand, totally feel you. So I would actually like to utilize another
like
part.
for example, I can just give you an example of what I'm looking for. For instance, I remember when I was younger, like in the earliest 20s, I was very interested in image consulting and beauty and all those things, and I realized that to the way you look after your nails, like you paint your nails and all that, like especially the gel nails, it's like exactly the same way people paint their walls, because first you have to I don't know, to make it even, and then you have to put a base and then a first layer and then a second layer and then a coat or something like on top of it. And I have the impression that it looks like the level you said, the systematic level or something like that, where you can use your knowledge of something to find relationship to other things, to other ways of functioning, like other areas or other fields. I mean, so that was a very, I think, if you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong, but to me it looks like a very concrete example of how it happened in real life, in the systematic level. So if you could give me examples like that, I would understand it better than the mathematics.
Sure. So I will say that intuitively speaking, what you described does sound systematic to me. What I want to take advantage of in the book is that they do have an invented example when they take a closer look at the most common stages of complexity for people. And it would be like, I would like to just go through that to an extent. So back at abstract, when we create a single abstract variable, let's invent a variable to try this out. The ruggedness of mountain cliffs. We can have more or less of it, relate it to time, say that this variable causes mountains to be difficult to climb, etc. We can name the variable a new word, blefusity. This is a made-up word, so I'm going to say it however I want. It isn't just ruggedness, it's ruggedness in the way that mountains are rugged, not the way that a person can have a rugged look. High blefusity means that a cliff range has many sharp edges, and low blefusity means that it has fewer such edges and that it is smoother. So now that is an abstract variable, and we can talk about something having more blefusity, which means it's probably going to be hard. We can say this variable causes mountains to be difficult. And that's pretty cool. We can relate all kinds of, we can talk about this abstract thing across many different cases, many different events. Super useful. But what we can't do is describe regular relations between different abstract ideas. So over in the formal stage, when looking back at blefusity, the ruggedness of cliffs, and steepness, we concluded that blefusity and steepness both cause the climb to be more difficult. But let's assume that on a very steep cliff, you can only climb it if it also has a high blefusity. Otherwise, there's simply nothing to hold on to. If you only study blefusity, you won't notice this. You'll still be back at, but more of this makes the thing harder. All steep cliffs with high blefusity are difficult to climb, as are all not so steep cliffs with high blefusity. It is only when you compare different steep cliffs that you notice that high blefusity makes for an easier climb. So what we assumed was a property, an essence, inherent to the variable, was in fact only true under some circumstances. We've gone from a thinking with blefusity and steepness to one where we can relate blefusity and or if steepness. and our whole view of the situation changes. We've invented a rule that describes the relationship between three variables. Blafusity causes greater difficulty under low steepness and lower difficulty under high steepness. We call it the general rule of Blafusity, an elegant rule of the universe. And so here we're relating different abstract variables conditionally, rather than just having this thing and saying more of this means this in a linear way. Past formal, we had the thing with Blafusity and the general rule of it. Now let's add another rule, the climber's characteristics. So we're not just looking at the thing, we're looking at interrelations of things now, a higher level of interrelations of things. The climber can be tall or short with corresponding lengths of arms, and she can be a good or bad climber. Are we just adding more factors? No, but we're looking at something different, how the entirety of the system is affected by the interactions of two quite different sets of variables. So let's say that the climber generally is better at climbing if she's taller, but then it turns out this only holds true under some circumstances. Sometimes shorter arms and legs are better. Shorter legs are better when there is very small distance between each crack and protrusion in the cliff. So now we have to break up the variable Blafusity into three constituent parts: the frequency, sharpness, and size of the cracks of protrusions of the rock. At very high frequency, that's low distance between cracks, shorter arms make for a better climber, and at medium or low frequency, so there are greater distance between each of the cracks, longer arms are advantageous. And the better the climber, the more she can use Blafusity to her advantage. This makes us reevaluate the general rule of Blafusity that we formulated at stage 11, because it turns out not to be so general after all. Even steepness can make for an easier climb, because with the right kind of Blafusity, it motivates the climber and breaks up the climb into manageable, interesting parts. As we see, the best climbers are actually demotivated by long, easy climbs, thus in practice, climbing the more difficult mountains with greater vigor and skill. So at a view from stage 12 systematic, we see that neither Blafusity, steepness, nor even difficulty were what they seemed. They're much more contextual than we would have thought. It's about how these things interrelate. So in a discussion, the stage 10 abstract thinker may appear more certain and common sense. Blafusity makes for a difficult climb. More of the variable means more of the other thing. The stage 12 thinker may seem less sure of herself and have to think longer and explain herself more technically and wordily, but she nevertheless has a much deeper understanding. Instead of just throwing out an abstract variable, you're understanding how kind of clusters of abstract variables between mountains and people relate systematically. And so that is kind of a systematic example. Very quickly, to be at the meta-systematic one, in the invented example, we end up kind of escaping the main scenario. We end up not talking about mountaineering anymore, because we're looking at principles or aspects of systems. So the term they grab here, which feels very like it's meant to be educational, so they go into a longer tangent about how alignability can relate to a system like a market, but they talk about alignability as the difficulty or cost to change any one variable, and like the effect that they have upon each other. So for instance, you can't easily change a mountain, you can't easily change a climber. They will relate as well as they relate. You cannot change the system to have greater alignment very easily compared to something like a market economy. And I repeat, we're not talking about mountaineering anymore, but this is like at a more abstract level of thinking. We're looking at properties of ways that large sets of variables relate to each other. They don't really go into it much deeper with the paradigmatic example, and there isn't a cross paradigmatic one. But is this clarifying for you at all, Gail?
Yes, yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, John, you're up.
Yeah, I was just getting confused about that metasystematic example that they were giving about alignability. What did alignability represent?
Alignability doesn't exactly represent any concrete thing, but it is a property of systems. So to go through it, we can observe that it isn't bluffusity and its subfactors, even combined with steepness, that determine how good a climb we get, how much value we get out of this system. Nor is it the characteristics of the climber that determines the climb. It's a property of the system as a whole, how well aligned the different variables across both systems, cliff and climber, are to one another with regard to value created by the cliff climber system as a whole. So we're looking at what actually makes a good climb with all of these variables coming together. With regard to, so the overall alignment of the system determines the climb, not any single variable like bluffusity. It's how all of these variables come together and whether that generates what we are looking for, whether it generates value. Our previous ideas about bluffusity reveal themselves as true but partial. So we talk about, sorry, what?
The way you described bluffusity in the last one also sounded like all those different variables come together to describe the quality of the climb. So maybe I'm not getting what this extra stepping outside of the last one is that he's referring to.
Yeah, because it isn't just about things coming together to make for a good climb. It's like, yes, and what do we call making a good climbness? Like, that's what alignability is as a general system property. It's like, yes, all of these things come together. The higher level thing is how, like, how do things come together? um, so this is this. So the system we've been describing, which you just described again, has low alignability because it's difficult or has a high cost to change any one variable, like to change the cliff. Changing the climber is kind of unthinkable when it comes to arm length, for instance. So the metasystematic thing here is alignability as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't about, like I said, we're past mountaineering at this point. We have abandoned the topic, mountaineering. That's what a cognitive advance often looks like. That which seems so important at an earlier stage seems less so and more contingent when viewed from a higher cognitive vantage point. We've made conceptual leaps from discussing relatively concrete and small matters to grasping a wider world. I'm reading this backwards, but I don't know. It clicks for me. There's a long stretch, as you're noticing, between the stage 10 abstract concept of bluffusity and the stage 13 meta-systematic concept of alignability. Again, something that is not inherently about mountaineering. We've made a major climb, no pun intended, into more abstract heights, viewing the world from a much more elevated conceptual vantage point. We've traveled away from concrete reality, whereas bluffusity is an abstract concept. You can still see it with your eyes. You can feel it with your hands. And we're at a way less tangible word, the alignability of systems and how it creates value. So here we are at a meta-systematic view, looking at variables among entire systems.
I see. Also, in each of these stages, did each stage come like it was my impression that each subsequent stage agreed that the previous stage was true, but added more depth to what that definition of the trueness is. So, like for going back to the abstract versus the the single variable versus multiple variables. So in the single variable, bluffusity just means like the ruggedness of the cliff, right?
Yeah, and like we can talk about that variable. We can say this variable causes mountains to be difficult to climb, etc. We can have more or
Right.
less of it.
And then when we go to the formal,
Mm-hmm. We start looking at how steepness and bluffusity interact, and we realize it isn't as simple as high bluffusity is high difficulty.
Oh, but he's not contradicting that, because all steep cliffs with high bluficity are difficult to climb, as are all not so steep cliffs with high bluficity. That's still true, right? Or is it not completely true?
When you compare, let's see, all steep cliffs are difficult to climb, as are all not so steep cliffs with high bluficity. It is only when you compare different steep cliffs that you notice that high bluficity makes for an easier climb. I don't assume that what we saw as true before is all true before holds. Like, how do I put this?
It's not entirely an include. It's transcend and modify.
Yeah,
Not
like it's
entirely just
transcend and
transcend and
coordinate
include.
at this system.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to understand, whether it's like whenever you go to the next stage, do you contradict what you believed in the previous stage, or do you still believe what you believed in the previous stage, but you just somehow bring in a new dimension that doesn't have to contradict it, but then opens up a new dimension of understanding?
Remember, this isn't necessarily about belief. It's about coordinating tasks. So how you may see the world at an abstract stage when you only have like single abstractions to go off of, and you would think like more of this abstraction is more something like this makes something harder. Yeah, more of that makes something hard. And then you come to more complex ways of interrelating those. It's kind of an entirely like a vast leap in complexity of how one is capable of seeing the world. It isn't necessarily that, oh yeah, all of my abstractions are true. It's that they're abstractions and you can coordinate those differently now. So you relate to them differently and you will have different views on how they apply to the world. I guess the simplest way to put it is that you're complexifying your view. Not to reuse the same word. But yeah, it isn't a neat transcend and include the truth of per se. Except, you could say it's true but partial, but you find so much more that your initial understanding was not really accurate, and you can appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. And my last question was, do you have like some personal examples from your own thinking, or things that have been meaningful to you that you've could give, that you then reflected upon those examples, that, oh yeah, that's an example, that seems to be an example of this stage of thinking, or this stage of thinking, or maybe even if you reflected on that example further and then you brought it to a higher stage complexity of thinking, that would be really helpful, I think, in understanding what this means.
Sure. So I'm just throwing this out here. I haven't vetted it with Dr. Commons or anything. But one thing I was realizing as I was looking at, especially like the definition of meta-systematic, of variables across systems, is that I think a lot of the time that I analogize, that I come up with analogies far-reaching between things, it is kind of it is a meta-systematic endeavor. One thing I was thinking of was actually violence, and how what violence is, like the aggressing against of something, even that's like very emotionally loaded, or the termination of something, or the threat of termination of something can appear across very different systems, like not just social systems, but even like in video games, like with incentives. Um, like you get a very abstract variable from that can appear in different systems, different sets of variables interacting. Um, in analogous, dare I say, isomorphic ways. Um, that's like a wetter social system kind of example. Like I think of relating verbal violence and physical violence as like sharing qualities of what are called violence in very like in an entirely different context, at least ostensibly. Um, or even like international operations, like nations aggressing on the activities of other nations in ways that don't even necessarily involve like spears, but it is still like, yeah, okay, cutting into the livelihood of this, threatening to cut into the livelihood at this, at such and such stakes.
Can you
And
explain like why this topic of violence, which seems to be an abstraction, and thinking about it from multiple different angles and contexts and definitions, is why do you see that as metasystematic rather than as the one that's equivalent to stage 11? And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to put it down or anything. I'm just saying, like,
yeah,
to help me understand why you say that.
yeah, it seems to me it's because it's a common kind of interaction that systems can have, basically, even very different ones. So that it isn't something I think of as physically as you attack people with knives and you attack people with knives. It's in completely different like sets of variables relating. So like we could look at people in a room, or we could look at an entire like geopolitical scene, or we could look at an economic context within which you're still seeing like systems interact in consistent ways, or in ways that are, I keep wanting to use words like isomorphic to each other. Does that make sense? Like it's a similar dynamic across sets of abstract variables. Systems of abstract variables, I should say.
Okay. So what makes you say that those other things that you're thinking about are systems? Maybe you need to describe this idea that you have about violence more deeply for me to see why the units that you're working with are systems, such that violence comes out as a meta-systematic abstraction from them.
I guess what he wants to know, and I would like to know too, is the analogy that you make, the actual analogy.
Yeah. It's a good ask. I haven't articulated this before. When I think of violence, I think of basically making an assault on the well-being of something, but though like in very general terms. So you could talk about economic well-being as being very different from emotional well-being of like individuals, as being different from, I don't know, two armies going at each other. But in each of those cases, there are ways to try to take some action to disrupt the well-being or like equilibrium of one of those systems. Economic violence is not going to be my specialty, but you can take aim at one's economic system, for example, with sanctions. Verbally or / emotionally, there are all manner of ways to try to take aim at the well-being of something. You know what that was? Physically, you can just hit somebody. So when I look at these variables interrelating, there are many people that would say that violence is only physical because that is like the most concrete version of that. But when you look at what like that actually means to like the physical, like this physical system of someone's body versus somebody's psyche versus a market, I get like, yeah, can I think of a finer way to put it than deliberate disruption of well-being? Where again, like I'm not talking about any of these specific systems. Like I could be talking about anything right now. I could be talking about economics or emotions or what have you. Does that make sense as to why this is something that I see as a variable that is outside of any particular system, but that can be instantiated in different systems?
What would be the violence between choose economical systems?
I thought of it like sanctions. I'm not an economist, but it is some aggressive action taken to disrupt well-being. You could actively blockade someone's supplies, for instance. And it
Or
would
put
still be taken.
tariffs, maybe?
I was trying not to say tariffs, but sure. Blockades are a pretty clear example as well. If you burn somebody's shipments, that could be seen as like a kind of diffuse violence on the society whose resources you're depriving them of, just as much as choking someone deprives them of air.
Well, I guess to me, what you're saying is it makes sense the way you're describing violence. But I guess I would see that actually at the stage 10, you're creating an abstraction from all of the physical ways that somebody can aggress or, as you said, attack someone else's well-being into an abstraction that you are calling and you're labeling with violence, or maybe you're abstracting violence itself into this concept of attacking somebody's well-being. And I think that's totally valid. I don't see systems. I don't see this is working on systems and like, maybe we need a different example.
Maybe I could and should come up with more concrete examples in my own thought, which is something I began to do as I was studying these stages more closely, but I don't have a ton on hand. I just realized it's like, oh, that is a kind of analogy that I look to. Oh, that is a kind of thing that I call a rhyme, like between different systems. Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Can
I offer maybe a candidate for something that might be metasystematic? Maybe other people can tell me whether this seems metasystematic.
Sure. Real quick though, I would say just that possibly to defend myself against what I like violence being a simple like abstraction. Maybe it just is. But it isn't just like it isn't a linear abstraction. Like it's something that looks at how many abstract variables relate systematically across different systems. So I am abstracting something from all of those instances, from all of those dynamics rather, but it's because I'm looking at how all of these things had already related. Like I'm already past a simple abstract variable and looking at formal rules between them and how all of these rules like function as part of a system. It's like across different systems, this kind of dynamic seems possible, seems to exist in some meaningful way. That's my thought anyway. But
and John, do you think my example was systematic, or what? Did it make sense to you?
What's your example, Gail?
Comparing how you do your nails with how you paint walls. You didn't hear it when I explained it?
Yeah, I was still concentrating on the other thing when you were saying that. But comparing how you do your nails to how you paint walls, I don't know. Is the way that do you have a systematic theory about various meta variables that are themselves abstractions of variables about how you paint walls, such that itself constitutes a system, such that you are comparing it to another system when you compare it to how you do your nails? Or that seems like a more simple thing to me.
Yeah, it's very simple. Making your nails, it's a system. It's several things that you do in order to achieve something. And so, for instance, you make your nails even, and then you put a base, and then one layer, and then another layer, and then a coat. And that's exactly what you do in painting, but also you can find this in other things. But yeah, so maybe it's not systematic, I don't know, but that's what I thought when the level was explained. But I don't know if it makes sense to you or not. Maybe it's not systematic.
Yeah, even if it takes multiple steps to it, I don't think that turns it into a system. A system already is, we're talking about something that's abstract and has multiple, it's already three steps removed from probably even more than that, removed from just something that requires multiple steps. I don't know. What do you think, Dustin? Does that seem like a system to you? Painting your nails?
It would be like a system of painting, but I'm trying to decide if I put it as systematic or formal. Because it's noticing how different thing. I guess I'm tempted to put it as systematic in my amateur opinion, because it's noticing how like a different context. Maybe it's like a. I guess I don't know how in depth you went with your insight there, Gail, but it is that in a different context, different, for example, a different substrate and different paints, do like correspond in similar ways.
Yeah, it's just an analogy. An analogy is just you see a process or something that is working in the same way, or a system or something that has some relations and functioning, and then you can put this functioning or this process or this whole thing into something else that has nothing to do with it, like painting a wall at the it's not necessarily similar to painting your nails, but because I say painting your nails and painting the walls, it sounds like it's the same thing, but one is from workers, like I don't know the word for the industry, but it's not the same industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just you can find some similarities in different industries, like an engineer can recognize things that function in some specific way, and then they can adapt it. Okay, they can use the same image, the same, not just an image, it's the same functioning into another industry, maybe beauty, maybe beauty, it may be something else.
Well, I'm just thinking that we feel like we're like mired in a difficult place right now, and I just know that Bill and Josh have had hands up for a long time. I don't know if we want to try to
Yeah, we
hear
can
what
come
they
back
have
to
to
me.
say.
I
Or
have
what.
an example that I wanted to share, but we can
Yeah,
come
please
back to
share
me.
your example first, and then we can go.
Well, Bill and Josh have had their hands up, so let's go to them first.
Okay, we'll come back to you, John. If you put your hand down and then up, you'll probably be at the back of the hand line.
Okay.
Okay, Bill, what's up?
Hi, Dustin. Thank you very much for presenting this different scale. One of the things that I related to when you talked about it was the difference between maybe being able to understand a scale and being able to create it.
Yeah.
That and when some of those mathematical models that you presented, I went back to my calculus days where, I certainly feel like I could sort of understand it and sometimes work with it, but that's a whole lot different than actually creating it and being able to grasp something like that. But, sort of bringing things back down to earth, would you mind if I shared my screen with you?
Go ahead.
One of my relatives sent something. I don't think I can share until you stop sharing your screen.
It might also be a stream permission thing.
It kind of confuses things if you try to share two at one time. I mean, I can give permission for multiple people, but
yeah, I'm no longer sharing.
So very good. Can you see my little screen there?
Yes.
And in case you can't read it, it says, "It may be your right not to stand for the pledge, but before you decide, let me introduce you to someone who can't stand because he defended that right." There's a gentleman in a wheelchair with no legs. This comes from my brother-in-law. And I'm trying to figure out what level that's at. It seems like he sort of understands some abstract concept of freedom, but can't really work with it very well. You know, can only see a very straightforward, simple, you know, there's one interpretation, right? I mean, there's just, and you know, this is what we deal with in the world. And I'm trying to figure out, you know, whether spiral dynamics or integral or this model that you're showing me can give me some way to first understand it and then how to deal with this guy.
Gotcha. Well, yeah,
I
definitely.
hope that doesn't put you on the spot too much.
It does, but I do these to learn.
Do you mind just clarifying your question first, Bill? Like, what are you trying to deal with about this? Like, what's your objection to what he's trying to share?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Do you mind clarifying your question? When you say you want to deal with this guy, what do you mean? What is your objection to what he's saying that you want to deal with?
Well, I think he feels that, you know, there's a very simple one-way approach to freedom, that, you know, these military people are like perfect or something. I mean, what if I showed him a picture of the My Lai massacre? What's he going to say? You know, well, that's different. Well, no, it's, I mean,
Okay.
anyone that loses his legs in a military endeavor is fighting for my freedom. I mean, really? Well, sometimes we know that they're not fighting for our freedom.
That sounds,
So,
it reminds me of like a simple abstraction, like not protect or support our troops, or our troops are good.
right.
And that does very much remind me of back at stage 10 abstract, when you have like a simple relationship like that to a single variable. I think at formal you could start qualifying your abstractions more. That's kind of the point, or that's explicitly said that at stage 11 formal, you can start deciding when your abstractions do or do not apply. And so an unqualified abstraction like that and a moral impetus from that seems very abstract to me.
Right. Well, I think we can all see the complexity there, but I don't know that he can.
I don't think you can either.
And so is there any way to deal with this?
Gotcha.
I mean, basically you have to address people where they're at, right?
Yes.
At whatever level they're at.
I would,
and we don't want to sound too pompous and arrogant by saying, well, we can see complexity where you can't, you know.
yeah. Because the rhetorical side of it I was not prepared for, but you would have to talk about how we relate different variables. I saw Josh that put a comment in there. Soldiers don't fight for freedom, so shouldn't be. Yeah, those two would be one-sided, and it would be soldiers that do fight. Man, okay, getting into like for our freedom is harder. When breaking that down from a single abstraction. Because I guess like, is it that you want to complexify his perspective, Bill? For example, it not just it's good to support our troops in like a simple, virtuous way, but it's good to support good troops doing good things, and those are all things that can be qualified. Because then you're looking at relating variables in a more, I would think, more formal way, a more and or if kind of way. The abstract person might, or I guess I'm not sure if Josh, you mean Bill.
Well, he's certainly capable of abstract thought in other ways and in other areas.
But if
But-
he's not able to do the complex thinking, then he can't. There's no way you can make him understand that. So though, if you want to deal with him, it's not about making him understand something else. It's just to you understanding he can't understand more, and just be with him, just like accept him and like he thought and like he thinks, and not necessarily responding anything. Like you can say, oh, okay, or I don't know, but you know, just accept him how he is, because there's no way you can explain to him how the world is complex. He won't understand it anyway.
Yes, truthfully.
Well, and even if he does understand it, he may not want to accept it. I mean, this is,
that's the other side of it. Yeah.
I mean, this is really, I mean, the beauty of it is that it really, because it's very mathematical in its approach. It's a way to solidly affix this thing in the rational realm. The thing is that all of this also has an emotional realm. It also has an intuitive realm, and you know, the person just may believe that everybody should stand up for the for the pledge. I mean, that's if that's his belief, that's his belief. And as I've always said, when belief runs into the solid wall of a rational argument, the rational argument crumbles. I mean,
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And so again, what I think what Gail said here, and I totally agree with her, is there is a level of acceptance, and as I've often said, with some people, ability to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
You know,
There is a
That's like I feel like Dustin was on the cusp of trying to come up with an answer, and but let's let him. If you needed a minute to think before he gives an answer,
No,
let's
all-
let him think,
all
and
that was
then
really good.
other people can jump in.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to toss in that Commons has written in some papers on the personalities and traits of he specifies like major innovators, but you know, of high post-formal stage people. I'm going to throw an example of that up on the screen. Personalities and traits of major innovators, the necessary but not sufficient traits of environments and history that allow for true creativity. So you can think of this kind of like the personality traits that will help a person comprehend higher complexity, or that correlate to them appreciating more complexity. And you get things like personalities that withstand social conformist influences, personal ambition and curiosity, which is something I'd harped on my own before. Different cognitive styles. This basically gestures toward neurodiversity. I've seen Commons refer explicitly to ADHD in other papers, sorry. And tolerance of ambiguity, risk-taking, and tolerance for rejection. This alone is so intensely personal and impossible, like not reasonable to a person. For all I know, your friend has some deep emotional, egoic attachment to supporting our troops unequivocally, no matter what. And it would be a huge personal, not a rational hurdle for him to be tolerant of ambiguity, of maybe the troops aren't all good, which opens up a whole can of worms, you know? This is a good cognitive measure, but that is all it is. There are a lot of factors that come into play with what we are both willing and able to cognate. Just to flesh out that picture for you a bit.
It's a good share. So I'll jump in in response to Bill. So in the example that you showed us, Bill, I actually didn't see anything objectionable about that itself. I mean, all the person was saying was, before you decide you're going to dishonor something which has typically been honored in the country, think about all the other people who have felt like that was a very important thing. So let that be a factor in your consideration. To me, that seems respectful and like a reasonable request to make. I don't see that indicative of any particular stage, but I assumed that you had a broader context of relationship with this person that you were talking about, and your impression from that broader context was that this person is more stuck in a certain simplicity of thinking. Is that where you were coming from, Bill?
Yes, I think, Jonathan, you're exactly right. You can look at that as a man who, first of all, respects the abstract concept of freedom, and also that we fought for it. So those two things, and that he respects both things. But I think he's also suggesting that if you express your freedom of speech in that way by not standing, that you're probably not a very good person.
Still, yes, he's being dogmatic about that.
And I think in the abstract, you could have plausible deniability that picture doesn't say that, but the people who are strongly touting that, in my opinion, believe that you should stand for the flag, period.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you don't, that you just don't quite get it. And then, of course, that's our problem, is because we think we see something that they don't see.
Mm-hmm. So there's an inability to do perspective taking.
I guess I think I don't know that they would appreciate my perspective, but we have to be the bigger person here and try to see their perspective and wonder, I mean, how do you, I guess if you would look at him and say, well, if he feels like he's using his free speech to make us better by not standing or something, and give a good reason for that, because recently something happened that is objectionable, I don't think they'd buy it, and then they would think less of me.
And is it wrong that they think bad of you? Why would you care?
He's just frustrated by it.
They're my relative, and you want to try to get along and don't want to create a lot of controversy. So,
and if a lot of people think like that, they might curtail your rights and completely change the shape of your society. Abstract complexity is what corresponds to traditionalism, more or less, or amber, if you like. And you can see how when they have abstractions that they feel a specific singular way about, and they aren't coordinating them with more complexity, some things are just bad with no nuance.
Yeah, so no need to argue with them, because you will never win, especially if there are several people who agree on the same thing and you are the only one who doesn't. I think let them believe what they want to believe, and you believe what you want to believe, and you don't enter into any debate.
The Trump, I could agree that it couldn't be like rationally debated, but for there to simply not be anything, this is a difficulty with dealing with traditionalism, because it is just leaving it alone, like a decent solution, especially in a democracy. I don't know, how do you engage with it even obliquely?
Well, just leaving things alone creates more polarization.
Because like when you think of abstractions, this is also racial stereotypes, for instance, are single abstractions. And I don't know that you simply get around that by not, like, it's true you may not be able to rationalize a person out of a racial bias, but there is still something to be done there, one might argue.
Maybe you can give them an analogy.
An analogy?
An analogy, yes, because
very plausible.
Metaphors and analogies are helpful when you want to explain something to someone who doesn't know what you're talking about, or who can't know what you're talking about. For example, they have never seen that thing or whatever, something, and you want to explain to them. Then if you give them an analogy with something that they know very well, that they understand very well, then they can understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, and analogies relate abstract variables. And so I agree. Yeah, like that would even work out per this.
Or you can say that you agree to with freedom, that you do care about freedom too, that you value it, and that you value maybe fighting for it too. Doesn't mean that you value fighting in a war, but.
Yeah, I think you would have to, just rhetorically, you would probably have to affirm their basic feeling about their abstraction, if at all possible, or at least like give some legitimacy to their perception before going on to nuance it or to relate it to other things and start to complexify it in their mind. That's just my thought.
Is there any way we can move this conversation? This is really good stuff, and it's drawing us into deep discussion. But we're piling up hands here.
Yeah, we have not been observing the 5-minute rule.
Josh and Jim.
Yeah, we should go to Josh.
Well, Jim or Josh.
Say Josh, Jim, and then Daryl.
Okay, I'll remember that you were after Josh, Jim. Josh, what's up?
Okay, yeah, thanks for this presentation. It's another model to clutter up my mind, but yeah, this is useful though. I guess I have two potential angles on this. Either I could weigh in on this topic that Bill brought up with a real life example, or I could take things even further afield. So what question do you want me to ask is what I will offer.
Shoot. I'm interested in things going further afield, and it may come back around.
Okay, fair enough. So I see this as another useful model. I don't have an allegiance to any one. I'm guessing each of them have some validity and probably some invalidity, whatever. But I'm kind of I don't want to say I'm a practical person. I guess I come at things from the activist perspective. I'm like, cool, how do we implement these understandings, right? It's nice if 7 of us really deeply understand this model, but I would rather have one little grain of it get in the world and be implementable. So I guess I'm wondering what you think about this. So right when I saw the term model of hierarchical complexity, I'm like, ooh, a lot of people are not going to like that, right? And I don't love hierarchies. I think a lot of times they're bullshit. Sometimes I accept that, but I know that there is a lot of aversion to the concept of hierarchy, but that's neither here nor there. My question is about whether or not people who automatically dismiss hierarchies in all circumstances as oppressive, I wonder, do you think maybe, this is just one of my working theories, do you think maybe it's actually not simply the fear that the hierarchy is going to diminish somebody and demean somebody, it's that they unconsciously believe in the hierarchy to such an extent that it makes them uncomfortable to acknowledge that these systems are out there, that they themselves believe in them and put a lot of stock into them. In other words, saying like, okay, look, this person's better. I suck at chess, right? I consider myself a pretty smart guy, but I lose to 12-year-olds at chess a lot of the times, right? I don't think of myself as a lesser being. I don't think of myself as less intelligent. I think of myself as a lesser chess player, right? That's not that hard for me. And I don't put that in terms of my human ranking. Now, if I were in some chess tournament or some chess club thing, yeah, I'm at the bottom of the barrel. Maybe I have other qualities and people like me for those, but I'm going to have lower status there. but I myself don't really put much stock in that. So I guess I wonder if, and this isn't really about the model, this is about whether a model can be implemented in the world. Do you think if people come to terms with their own unconscious bias, assuming this theory is true, all of a sudden they're going to be less upset about hierarchies because they themselves are not placing as much value on it? Does that make sense? This is still a working theory of mine.
Yeah. If they come to terms with their own bias.
In other words, a lot of people who look at, let's say, just to make it simple, like women versus men thing, they're like, all right, it seems like women are a little worse at this on average. Not every woman, they're better at this. The idea that that makes women better or worse than is, I think, silly. I think you could acknowledge maybe, women have a higher social intelligence and are better at relating to people, whatever, without claiming that they're better, or vice versa. Let's say they're not as adept to computer engineering, which I sure as hell am not either. That doesn't make them lesser. But I think that the people who think that are unconsciously sexist, and they haven't come to terms with their own sexism, and then they project that sexism on everyone else by saying, well, maybe your average woman isn't as good at computer engineering. That's sexist. Does that make sense? Does that help it anyway?
Yeah, when you said projecting, I was saying yes, because from the beginning I was thinking that's projection. People project a lot of their rejected aspects and beliefs, and hierarchy can be part of one. So maybe they need to do their shadow work, but you're not the one to tell them that, of course. But yeah, that's projecting.
So if that's true, I mean, I don't know if other people buy that. There's just nothing we can do. We just have to accept that people will shut down discussions on these topics everywhere and not implement them anywhere in the world. I just don't find that satisfying answer.
You're looking for the same answer as Bill.
Well, I have a response also, but let's let Dustin respond, and then maybe other people can respond.
Oh, I was enjoying hearing the conversation, but I don't assume we have no hope when it comes to people projecting or having discomfort with hierarchy, especially because when it comes to this hierarchy, this is about as natural as they come. So it is pretty inarguable that sentences come after a nominal stage, for instance. Like these are just very abstract structures here. And when you start, it's like, okay, so you're dealing with an abstract variable. Yes, you are. You're dealing with relationships between abstract variables. Yes, you are. You're coordinating relationships of abstract variables into a system. Yes, you are. I don't know if the model of hierarchical complexity would be the foot in the door, especially with, well, maybe with more rhetorical development, because right now a lot of the examples are mathematical, like I've shown. That's Michael Commons' background anyway. I think it can be shown that some things just kind of are, and what would still linger is what that might mean. Like, I'm thinking of Nora Bateson right now, with how listening to her like bring up objections to stage theory in conversation, it did seem like a big deal for her was that somebody might be devalued or be like deeply offended for being found to be a lower number than somebody else or in a box lower on a chart. And I haven't seen that play out with something as abstract as complexity because it's just not a common conversation to have. I do think it's worth taking into account the complexity with which they would hold even like their biases, like man bad, woman good, or vice versa, is a very simple, direct abstraction that is not even very formal. And what I would do if I knew a person there would not be to like maybe like a bit of rationalizing. It's actually a similar conversation to what we were having with Bill's friend earlier. It's that you would start relating their abstraction, which would start to qualify and texture and nuance it. And there would probably be emotional work. Like if you have strong feelings about a sex, that probably was very deep. And Gail could probably talk more about that with regards to shadow work than I could. But it would be that kind of thing. Like it would be personal, emotional, like not just resonance, like being there for a person and giving them room to kind of open up without judgment and see that didn't hurt. And this will allow people to, I mean, looking back at the traits, to go up in stage, like to be more curious. They will feel freer to do that. They will feel more able to live with this ambiguity because it doesn't need to come with abuse, for instance. Yeah, a lot of what I think about ends up coming around to making a, not to invoke this term, but a safe space for people, literally, in interaction with you or wherever, whatever the context is, to be able to expand and unfold their view, to complexify it safely. Does that start to make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I guess the only lingering piece is just that it doesn't matter how safe the space is, if they themselves hold these biases against certain groups, they're always going to see that, and they're going to see it in you. And I just have never figured out a way to address that, rather than, oh, I just have to be the emotional sponge to listen to them. That's fucking boring. I don't want to do that.
I mean, I don't, it isn't all going to be on one person anyway, right? Like it's all a world. And especially if this is over the internet, you're deeply limited anyway.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, no, this is helpful. No, I appreciate it. It's still a thing. I mean, people don't have to take my theory as true. It may not be true that they have these implicit biases or unconscious biases. I'm suspecting that they do, and that can't be overcome until they themselves, ironically, become less sexist. It's like, as soon as you stop being as sexist, you're going to stop seeing sexism everywhere, because you have resolved that inside yourself. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's just, I think this is an interesting model, and yeah, I think it just needs a different name. That's all.
Maybe.
Well, this is the one that I was so interested in trying to overlap with ego development theory last week, and I think I could make a better shot at that now, actually, coming up with like very abstract similarities between them. But regardless, like I think to mention it because like with ego development, it's that much clearer that there is a kind of like, all of this is ultimately about ego security at whatever stage you're at. And so when someone feels that they can make sense of the world by deciding that women are this or men are that, that probably speaks to some need for safety or security or control and understanding of the world. And that's a real psychoanalytical thing to get at, to empathize with or to provide confidence in lieu of. Just as a thought. We could even talk more about this in this session or between us. But yeah, it's an interesting and worthwhile topic because that's the real practicality of it.
Cool. Well, thanks.
And maybe you can try to show them, if it's the space is there, like it's safe and you can talk like that. Maybe you can show to them how some hierarchies are good. It's not necessarily about power, or it's not necessarily wrong. And if the space is even safer, you may try to help the person find where they have hierarchies. They have hierarchies in their life, and for example, where they are higher than someone else in some hierarchy in their life, for instance, compared to their children or something like that. And also you can also show them that hierarchy doesn't have to be a question of power, because I already gave these two examples some times ago, but maybe you don't remember. So when you have a baby, and then you have an older person. One is obviously more advanced, more experienced, more developed, and that's not about power. It's just a natural thing. So you don't have to value babies over young or older people, or value older people over babies. Is just how things are, and you can value both. Like both are lovable the same way. And also, if you have a building, you are at the ground, it's 0, and then you are at the 5th level. It's higher. It's on the top. So obviously there are some hierarchies here between stages, like the levels, but actually it's not about power. Being at the 5th level is not better than being at the ground level. It can be even the contrary. Maybe at the ground level you have a garden, which you can't have at the 5th level. So maybe try to show them things like that. If the space is good enough to have these types of conversation, because obviously you can't have these conversations at any time, like when you're working and all that, it's not possible. And also, you don't like to deal with emotions, but with green people you have to, because that's what they are at. So emotions are very, very, very important. And maybe they have some wounds around bad hierarchies, like power hierarchies that have had control onto them. Like maybe their parents were very hard with them, maybe aggressive or very controlling or something, or maybe the government is oppressive and things like that. So maybe they have something in their life very wounded around hierarchies. And if you can go to them to this place where they can feel it and make it be released, then it would help them probably. So here are my few ideas for you.
I back that. Alas, we've lost Daryl. Okay. To try to reconcentrate the flow of the conversation at this point. Before I pick on Jonathan or Paul, Jim, I've been following your asks in the chat, and you had your hand up some time ago. What I've been flashing across the screen are the pages of these specific stages that relate to how they reason about politics at different levels of complexity. I have gone over from the abstract view up to the meta-systematic view of that. I don't know, Jim, if there is any comments you had to make on this, or if you're good to just have us move on to probably Paul and then John.
No, I was just going to just a very simple way is I'm trying to model my experience in sustainability with some of these levels, and very quickly, there's this idea of being sustainable, and it's like a one-dimensional, you're either better, more sustainable or unsustainable. Well, at the next level of abstraction, there are these, independent but interrelated variables of the economy, the social issues and then ecological issues, but you continue to go down in more abstractions, and you get to this case where it all depends on a greater context. So I can almost see, even in my world, I was just trying to say, I can see where those levels have played out. So anyway, I'll just stop there, and it's just that observation.
Nice, cool. Okay, then Paul, you're next up.
Jonathan, if you want to go ahead, I've got some notes on my stuff, so I'm not going to lose track of what I was going to ask.
You can go first, Albert.
I guess this is, I'm kind of asking this question. I'm trying to decide whether I want to lay out the money and get a copy of the Listening Society and spend the time reading it. I guess, first of all, this is really good presentation, Dustin. I have to admit, I really do like this model because it it does have its emphasis on intellect, on reason, the fact that it can be classified in terms of mathematics. That's a real strength to it. And it also that granularity can sometimes make it more accessible, at least to me. Okay, so to my original question, the book is about politics, right?
So yeah, it bills itself as a meta-modern guide to politics.
Okay. Does it in the descriptor of stage 12 systemic, they talk about that stage 12 is the ability to identify patterns among literal relationships. Now, again, this is it takes a very logical intellectual approach. Does the book at all get into the fact, because it is about politics, does it get into the issue that, well, the truth is pattern recognition is not just purely intellectual. I mean, particularly in social situations, which politics is all about, you are engaging in both emotional and intuitional pattern recognition. It has nothing to do with, at least it has nothing to do with purely intellect. You know, when you begin to engage your emotions and your intuitions with your intellect, you get this pinball back and forth, back and forth. It can't just be isolated. Does the book get very much into those emotional and intuitional elements?
Yeah, it does. So I don't know if I presented probably like over a month ago now on the effective value meme, but that is in this book. And for anyone who may not recall, effective value meme is the actual stage theory presented in this book. So for background, Hansi Freinacht, the writer of this book, is a pseudonym under which two authors write. Both of these authors, one of which is Emil Einer Free, who you may see on Facebook. The other is Daniel Gortz. Both of them were kind of like spiral dynamics, Ockwell readers and thinkers. And Daniel Gortz actually has studied with Michael Commons for a time, and you will find their name on some of the same papers. So having both like a sociologist background to them and this kind of like clinical psychological one, this is only one dimension of effective value meme. So to take it apart, effective value meme is literally the value meme a person affects onto the world. It's what you effectively are. And that is presented as a kind of an average of cognitive development, which they measure with the model of hierarchical complexity, symbolic development, which this is where they talk about code. So like modern, postmodern, or post-Faustian, traditional is what that basically is. Like code, like beliefs, like documents or artifacts that are given to you, and how
Right.
those influence you and how you interact with them, which of course has a lot to do with your own personal complexity. And then subjective states, which is kind of how you're doing in a deep way. I'm just going to jump over there real quick. From the lowest to the highest ones, which these are more than just fleeting emotions. They're kind of like what your kind of overall line is at a time. So there are these emotions, literally, and there is depth, which is fascinating to dive into, but it's kind of like you can very loosely put it as like the variety of states one has integrated into their personality and like really processed and like gotten how this fits into the world and people's experiences. Um, Another way to put it is like the contact a person has with reality. That's depth, as they outline in much more detail in this book. And so the answer to your question is yes, they take more into account than the cognitive. They don't necessarily um, they don't go to the pains of showing like a giant matrix of how complexity will interact with your code, will interact with your stage, but they gesture to all of these contributing.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a very worthwhile book, in my opinion. They claim to have redefined stage theory in this book. Maybe that's too lofty a claim, but they do something new that helps a lot of things make sense when you have, for example, code versus complexity next to each other. What was considered a green suddenly is a lot less ambiguous. Like, is it a person parroting somebody that wrote about intersectionality, or is it someone who's actually functioning at systematic complexity?
Thank you.
Gotcha. All right,
Yeah,
Jonathan.
Jonathan, let me lower my hand here. So,
All right. So I was wondering about an example of metasystematic. So we have all these different stage theories that I've presented on in the past 6 months, like Kohlberg's, which we're reading about in the reading group. Maybe that's like an example of a system. Each of those stages itself is like an example of a stage 11 complexity, where it takes multiple variables, certain premises, what are your bases for for determining how to do what's good. And then there can be multiple competing claims for that, and then it draws a conclusion based on that. So each of those moral stages itself could be like a stage 11 level of complexity, and then the system itself, I guess, would be stage 12. So then I guess a metasystematic thing would be taking Kohlberg, and then like what I think what Cook Writer was aiming to do in her trying to in describing each of her stages of ego development, describe how that stage relates to all the other systems. Like she had a perspective taking quality to the stage, and she had a hierarchical complexity quality. She didn't align it with Kohlberg, but like wouldn't any system basically which is trying to coordinate all of these other systems into something where you see like the bigger picture that arises out of them that might be like one of ego development that is ultimately that in some ways coordinates moral development and all the other types of development. Wouldn't that kind of be like a metasystematic thing?
I tend to think so. Yeah, I tend to think that, for example, stage theories are metasystematic.
So I was suggesting that Kohlberg's stage theory is just systematic. Oh, so you're thinking that am I not being loud enough?
It really is that my laptop seems to be very quiet right now. Even though I've got the volume all the way up, I can't quite account for it.
So I had been thinking that stage theories themselves are systems of all of the variables at each stage, but I guess you could say stage theory itself is already metasystematic.
Could each, for example, with Kohlberg, could each one be a system? Because when I think of, for example, stage 6 of Kohlberg, I'm thinking of something that tries to, would I want to say that's systematic or formal? Because I didn't just see it as like stage 6, for instance, people don't necessarily have context to what we're talking about. How do I want to dive into this? Because I think that the far-reaching, like what is being suggested in like a stage of moral development is like a way of correlating like relationships between abstractions. Like that's how I tended to think of that, because that's like the level of coordination that's going on there. Let me see. Would it be? So if I go to another of the tables, you formal, it's this, but not this. Huh? Like, would we just say that, for example, John, you know what I mean? Like in Kohlberg's Moral Stage 6, where he talks about like corresponding what everybody thinks of everything in a situation and coming to a like kind of broader judgment about what would be the overall, the maximum utility derivable there. Is that just a formal rule, or is that dealing with like relationships between linear formal relations?
Interesting. Kohlberg didn't
I feel
yet
like
know
that's the
about the
question
MHC.
there.
It wasn't invented yet when
What was
Kohlberg.
it?
Kohlberg didn't know about the MHC. I don't think. I think the MHC, Michael Commons. I think he came a little after Kohlberg. He was in the 80s. Michael Commons. Is that
Well,
right?
he like they knew each other. Like Kohlberg, Commons spoke directly to Kohlberg. This is actually in some ways made as a response to Kohlberg's framework.
But Kohlberg talks about how his framework aligns with the Piagetian system. So I'm curious if Piaget didn't go beyond stage 10 or 11. Piaget went up to stage 11, right?
He went to formal. Post-formal is like a big discussion topic within the model of hierarchical complexity, but formal is
So
where
formal is stage 11, right?
10. Or wait.
Isn't 10
Yes.
abstract and
Yep. Okay,
formal
yeah,
11?
my bad. There is, after this paper, a stage that is added such that yes, formal is 11 in the book I just showed you, and in the most recent version of the theory.
So Piaget went up to formal. So that means Kohlberg thought that his system correlated all the way up to formal, probably. But then I'm thinking whether Kohlberg himself, in order to create the system, had to have had stage 12. I don't think that you're necessarily creating systems in order to do stage 6 moral musical chairs, higher order moral musical chairs.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I don't understand exactly what defines stage 12.
12 isn't systematic.
Yeah, it seems to me this is where, as I was looking at this, it seems like this is where we begin to enter the level of abstraction, where
Never did. He
the
left.
more you, the deeper you dive, the more obscure it becomes.
I do think there is a right answer here. I think it's me that is like the weaker link at this point. And also solve equations with several unknowns. Is he only giving a formal?
Kohlberg actually, maybe we'll get to this in our readings, because Kohlberg's going to correlate his system with Piaget's system, so we'll be able to see, if we read that, we'll be able to see exactly how he sees it correlated. I think that's going to be the reading for 2 times from now. He does a whole meta correlation of everything. So we'll see whether he correlates his stage 6 with something which with like the more advanced formal of Piaget, which I don't know, maybe his conception of the more advanced Piaget formal is the same thing as systematic in MHC, or whether it's still within stage 11, even in the MHC.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to for me is I want to be more rigorous in being able to differentiate mere formal relations with something that takes on a system, like something that reaches systematic. Basically, I want to know if what Kohlberg suggests could be resolved to like simply like formal instruction or a formal method of evaluating what is moral.
But my main idea was that trying to coordinate all the different stage theories together would be metasystematic. Or do you see that already as paradigmatic?
I guess it would depend what you're trying to coordinate. Because I can definitely see how trying to find like an abstract variable that like, for example, that rises in all of these would be very metasystematic. Because you have all of these interrelating. Yeah, I think I'm inclined. Is it metasystematic or one-sided? Abstract metasystems. Because I could see. Yeah, this is probably going to be the next research step for me, is coming to a finer differentiation between like would a stage theory be a metasystem in that it would, no, because we would be looking at homomorphisms between stage theories. I guess I tend to think, yeah, looking for like relationships between stage theories would be metasystematic because you'd be trying to extrapolate variables between systems. But to come up with something really novel would be from a higher stage. Like paradigmatic or cross-paradigmatic. Like, I don't know that you would be creating a new stage theory at metasystematic alone. In fact, I doubt it.
If it's a theory of theories, it's meta.
Maybe because when it's paradigmatic, that speaks to like universal principles applicable to different levels of analysis and phenomena. We can compare state like systems at metasystematic, but to come up with something that like a novel metasystematic thing would have to be higher.
So what was the question again? I can't remember.
We were just asking whether coordinating stage theories is metasystematic.
Yeah, I want to go back through more of the literature and come up with a sure answer about that.
I'd also like to say, I'm not really sure. I'm not convinced that people can't, once they reach adulthood, that they can't continue to develop. Well, I guess they were saying that you could continue all the way till age 30 to potentially reach the higher stages, and maybe even if those are within your grasp. So I guess they agree that complexity development continues into adulthood, but you're only going to reach those higher stages probably if you really apply yourself to pursuing intellectual development, like as a priority in life, I imagine.
Yeah, like the traits that he describes, curiosity, tolerance of ambiguity, ambition, just outright wanting to solve a problem and sticking to it. Those are the kinds of things he talks about.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the challenges, everybody.